Welcome back to all who attended our first session, and welcome to any who've just joined for the second session. I'm not going to run through all the housekeeping again, but do need to share some items. If you're new to this event, in joining, you will have been prompted to sign into Slido, which is an app we're using to do Q&A and polls. We will also use details of those who sign in to send out digital badges you can add to your LinkedIn profile if you so choose. You can also reference the badge and attending this event as part of your own CPD activity. You will see a control panel located at the top right of your screen if you're on a laptop, or at the bottom of the screen if on a mobile device. The panel has tabs for Q&A and polls, and you can enter questions under the Q&A tab. If you see someone ask a question you like, if you like the question, it raises it up the list we're looking at. Our moderator will be monitoring the list and deciding which questions to ask the panelists. We also had a lot of questions come in prior to the event, and we've shared those with our teams beforehand. And if there are any remaining at the end when you complete the survey and when you sign out, then add the question in there and say you'd like the presenters to contact you, and we'll connect the two together. During the event, we'll be asking polling questions, and we'll give you about 20 seconds to answer. If you have any issue with answering the polls, log a comment under Q&A so we can timestamp your participation. For those of you that are CPAs and have requested CPE credits, answering the polling questions is a requirement to evidence you've attended the event, and you need to respond to at least 4 for this session and attend for at least 50 minutes. At the end of the event, as you exit, you will also receive a short survey. We appreciate your feedback. So let's kick off with the first poll for this session, and that should be: is AI more likely to enhance human roles or cause job displacement? And the answers are enhance human roles, cause job displacement, both, or neither. So please respond to that. And while you're responding, let me introduce our moderator for this session, Ryan Clacher. Ryan heads up looking after our East Coast chapters and was previously our New York chapter president. Ryan is a director with the Siegfried Group in New York and is a South African chartered accountant. He qualified with Mazars and then moved to work in their New York office before joining the Siegfried Group. Before I pass over to Ryan, let's see the result of the poll. If you can close that out for us now, Ian. And it looks like both is the answer by 74%, and enhance the human roles 23%. So thank you for that. And Ryan, I'll pass to you.
Thank you, David. Appreciate it. Thanks, everyone, for joining. I hope most of you were able to join for the first session. I definitely learned 1 or 2 new things, and I will try and incorporate some of that into our discussion here today. So my job as moderator really is to, keep the flow of the conversation going, ask some good relevant questions, and, keep our panelists, our esteemed panelists. When David and I discussed this probably about 2 or 3 months ago, we wanted to get a good mix from the accounting and finance worlds, a representation of our various chapters as well as institutes. So without further ado, as I introduce the individual panelists, I'll give a brief introduction, hand it over to them, and then they'll talk a little bit about what's happening, what they are doing in AI, and what their companies are currently doing in AI. So without further ado, I'd love to introduce Nicola Bain, who I've worked closely with here in New York, has been part of our chapter team for many years. She's the managing principal in New York and New Jersey for CLA. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Nicola.
Thank you so much, Ryan, and thank you to you, David, and the rest of the team for having me here today. I'm really excited to talk about what CLA is doing in this space, and I think it's such an exciting time for our profession as a whole. I do have a couple of slides to share. I'm a very visual person, so I will pop those up on the screen just to take you through a little bit about who we are and what our journey is. So for those of you who've maybe not heard of CLA, we're a top 10 professional services firm here in the United States. We have a global presence. We're in 20 plus countries across the globe. And here in the United States, we have 9,000 people across about 133 locations. And we have 5 key service lines that we represent: the audit, tax, outsourcing and consulting, digital, and wealth advisory. And that digital is really where we're kind of here today, and that's our newest service line across the firm. And so my role here at CLA as the managing principal, as Ryan mentioned, I take care of New York and New Jersey. I have about 300 amazing colleagues that I work with day in, day out. And part of like an integral part of my role is to guide them through this journey and the change transformation that is AI. And we have the beauty here at CLA that we're doing it both for ourselves and for our clients. I'll focus obviously today on the public accounting aspect, but some of what I'm talking about is very applicable to our clients too. So CLA's journey, back in 2022 or 2023, sometime around that area, we decided as a firm, we're going to invest $500 million in our technology and AI infrastructure. What does that mean? That means looking at solutions that are both inside of CLA and also external to CLA, so purchasing solutions and internally generated. We are doing that over a number of years. So we said between 5 and 10 years, we expect to input that investment. And those solutions will include things that CLA will both be a consumer of and also solutions that we will be offering to our clients as services. We serve the heartbeat of America. And so we recognize that a lot of our clients, whether it's small and middle-sized, they do not have the funds and infrastructure to make a similar investment. So we're really actively pursuing opportunities to bring solutions such as, your ChatGPTs, your Copilots, things like that to people and give them a safe way to use them and the tools that they need to do so with their people. We are in all of the industries, I would say. It's 14 different industries. So we get the opportunity to see how these work. And there are a lot of different case studies when we're looking at technology about what different industries need. Some people are focusing more so on their people. So how are we utilizing our workforce and upskilling our workforce? And some of it is more so their machine learning, their infrastructure, their manufacturing, and how do they leverage data technology to make that much quicker. Overall, as a firm, we're really excited about this journey. We have a saying, and you'll hear me say this a lot, is that AI will take your jobs to a whole new level, right? So they're going to take them to a whole new level. We are expecting that there will be a change in the workforce. And if in me, I'm an optimist. I think it's a positive change. I think we're going to see a lot less data entry. I think we're going to see a lot more critical thinking, a lot more advising coming out of it. So that's what we're really trying to do. And we will stick with our purpose. And I put it here on the page here, which is to create opportunities for our clients, our people in our communities, regardless of whether that is a people-led opportunity or a technology and people-led opportunity. I don't think I see that changing. So I want to share a couple of the objectives for why we're going on our digital transformation. We really want, we're a client service business. We want to be enhancing the client experience. And so one of the main things that we're doing is having a rethink and a refresh of our client-facing portal. Having everything available to you as a client at your fingertips, whether it is, entering the data that you need to be able for us to be able to complete your tax returns, accessing different applications we may need to use, communicating with different team members. We've created what we call a client HQ, which is your front door to a seamless service. So really trying to enhance that. We're obviously trying to optimize our processes and create efficiencies. A key target of ours is eliminate data entry, right? We went to university. We do not want to be entering things into a keyboard. That is not what the new generations want. They want to be really getting hands-on experiences and advising and really becoming that strategic partner to our clients. So let the technology do that, and let's upskill our people to have those experiences. How do we scale it? There are, I think, 30 million privately held businesses in the United States. We service a fraction of those. I think a lot of our competitors service just a fraction of those. How do we continue to scale? It's a hugely underserved market. So using this technology for us to be able to reach more clients, more mom and pop shops, and be able to really expand our reach here. And then accelerating our digital transformation. We wanted to do this and invest it as a partnership-led model because we want to be competitive. We have made the decision to not outsource overseas. That is a decision that CLA stands by, and it may be great for other firms. We've decided that is not our stance. So how do we maintain all of the work here in America? Well, we need to be investing in technology so that we can remain competitive here and attractive for individuals as well. And again, that talent development. One of the things that I think has been the most exciting, announcement and since I've been here at CLA for the past 3 years is the build of our connection centers. Those connection centers are effectively learning centers where we're reimagining learning. You don't necessarily need to learn how to put something into a form anymore. Now we're going to be, learning how to be a relationship person or critical thinking. And we just think that those skill sets that you're going to develop are going to change. And maybe it's not your traditional accountant anymore as well. Maybe other people who have took a different path in their career come into the accounting profession a little bit later and have a different skill set to offer. So how do we do that there? Just real quick, I kind of touched on a few of these, but these are the main focus areas that we're looking at for both ourselves and clients. We have our automation. We think that a lot of the finance function can be automated, and I've put AP in there as an example. There are tools out there that already do that. There are also ways that you can integrate different solutions. So we advise a lot of our clients with that. Your business intelligence and reporting, this is kind of your data. It's so important in today's economy, especially when things are changing day by day with everything that's going on in the world, to have accurate real-time data. So how do you get access to that? Cybersecurity, very obviously an important topic. I actually just received notice that somebody I know had a cyber breach. And so how do we help clients? And I think it's becoming more and more of a threat. And it's becoming a little bit harder to identify too. ERP systems, your SAPs, your Oracles, there's a lot of solutions. A lot of the times those systems do not talk to each other. How do you integrate them so you can have your systems speaking and giving you accurate real-time data? Machine learning and AI, we're going to touch on a lot more of that, I think, as the session goes on. And then again, just your systems integration. I did have a case study here. I have a million case studies about what we've been doing, and you can access all of this actually as well on CLA's website. But just an example of one of our intelligence platforms where we utilized, the client's data they had a lot of disparate systems. They were unable to make accurate decisions. And so we came together with them, took a look, mapped out a technology plan for them. So, a 2-3 year, where do you want to be, a digital roadmap, and help to integrate all of their systems. And now they're able to get that accurate real-time data. When we think about how scary technology can be, there's a lot of examples where technology can be really impactful and really a collaborator with the individual. So thank you, Ryan. Back over to you.
Thanks, Nicola. Very good. Our next panelist, so I had the privilege of first meeting Errol Finkelstein, a fellow South African SAICA member. Back in COVID, we hosted a December virtual event, and one of the first events we did as CAW. And he had some, insightful knowledge to share, and we thought he'd be a great person to have discuss AI with everything that he's doing. Errol Finkelstein, he is the co-founder and COO of ChipX Global. So without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Errol.
Thank you so much, Ryan. Appreciate that. Unfortunately, the format doesn't permit me to go much into the chip side, which is a fascinating story in its own right. But I've got 4 short topics that I wish to go to. We've all seen this kind of thing from the FTA. Can we just have one day when no one mentions AI? Well, it's certainly not today. I'm going to touch on, in these few minutes, fundamental business strategy and AI, market reality check through a QuickBooks survey, optimum mix for your workforce, and the depth of apps, including Excel. So here we go. Fundamental business strategy. If we start talking about your business and AI, in our opinion, and this is what we always do, is we say, have you got a strategy document? Do you have a plan? Else, let's create one. Because your AI strategy needs to be informed by your overall business mission. There's no question. It's not technology for technology's sake or solutions looking for a problem. Clearly, competitors out there adopting the new tech, we have to make that assumption, and they're gaining market share. Or the alternative and substitute products. We've seen one example, especially from the fintechs. Fintechs are eating the lunch of banks, of accountants, of lawyers, of all sorts of different categories of businesses. So through that comparative analysis, one needs to pinpoint what piece of this technology pie do you need to prioritize. Our clients, your clients, are automating, they're putting in AI, and I think they're demanding that their consultants and firms and professional providers keep up with them. And of course, accounting practices are not immune to change. There's no inalienable right of accounting practices to exist as businesses. And technology is moving them fast down that pathway. So the answers to the basic questions we all learned in probably Strategy 101, what business are we really in? What value do we really create? And I'll just put one of my little, hopefully, nuggets. Do go back. It's probably a 34-year-old book by Tom Peters and his partner, In Search of Excellence, basically how America turned itself around in dire straits. So, quick reality check. QuickBooks, I discovered, did a survey of about 700 accountants, a third of them more or less in practice, two-thirds, therefore, in other roles recently in the States. Here are some of the highlights. On the right-hand side of the screen, on some of my screens, there are references. Please feel free to dive in. The highlights, though, 93% of the respondents have used AI to support their strategic business advisory roles already. And layer on top of that accountants are planning to spend an average of $20,000 in tech this year. Of those, however, only 28% say that their firm's training programs fully equip employees with the technology skills that they need to succeed. Big gap, big vacuum, big potential competitive advantage if you can fix that. Unsurprisingly, then, 1810 accountants report difficulty hiring the kind of skilled professionals that they want for their firm. Astonishingly, 98% of the respondents say that they deploy standardized technology stacks, so particular forms of technology which come with major advantages. Great, but crazy that 6 in 10 of them agree that if their clients push back on having to conform to those technology stacks, they will now rather fire the client than change their technology. Very interesting. So in summary, this whole fascinating recent survey said this technological transformation requires overcoming integration challenges, tackling the talent gap, and staying ahead of client expectations. I think we've heard a lot of that already today. What is your optimum workforce mix? We've heard some echoes of that question. Well, I adopted a zero-based budget style to try to unpack this question. And what I mean by that is let's first identify the outcomes, the services, the value add that your firm is intending to deliver. Then reverse engineer it and say, what is the bare bones needed to deliver and create those outcomes? And how is that done? Whatever's most important to you, the cheapest, fastest, highest quality, whatever, to do so. Having got to that point, we can then say, right, which of all of those range of skills and activities can we apply the digital stack, automation, AI, IT generally, to perform those tasks? And then the balance really is for humans. And almost by definition, those will be the kind of things that I think Nicola in part mentioned a moment ago: negotiations, decision-making skills, contractual skills, the leadership skills. Those will be where most of the humans end up. The rest can be done by these kind of machines. Of course, not today or tomorrow. if one's got a plan and you see this is a 3-year, 5-year, you move your firm in that direction. So I think that's how it's going to be done. There's been a lot written about this. This is a Price Waterhouse article from December 2017, PwC in the Netherlands, Human Value in the Digital Age. Lots to learn and to read, lots of probing business questions in the HR side. Finally, though, fascinating, and earlier on, we did have reference to this subject, that Chief Executive of Microsoft, Satya Nadella, last December spoke of the demise of his very own Excel, Word, and apps generally in the generic sense. Why did he say that? Well, sorry, we don't have time to listen to that, I'm afraid. If there's only one thing, especially for the non-technical folk on this conference, that you take away, it's this single slide. And I'll try and unpack that somewhat. What we see is the overall processing landscape. And I think Chris was talking about this in his fascinating airlines application. We've got the data layer. And here, I don't mean it technically, I mean the data of your firm, your clients, the data that's out there online, publicly available, all the data that's you can get hold of. Then there's the conversational layer, which is the question that I think Chris was posing. I need to do this kind of analysis. That case, are we up with Sarbanes-Oxley or whatever it may be, whatever the task is, that gets converted, pushed into the AI processing layer, understands the requirements, knows what is the relevant data, processes it, packs it into the outcome. Hey, presto, that's it. If you want it as a PDF or a graph or a movie or whatever it is, it's done for you. So just recapping, data lake overview, the conversational hour allowing users to effortlessly communicate their needs. The connection, the AI processing has taken place, and the outcome is delivered. Here's another snapshot of the same kind of process, because it's so fundamental. And Nadella was saying that basically that is why he perceives all of the AI technologies conceptually. I'm not for a minute knocking the sophistication, the breadth, the depth, and all this, conceptually being dumbed down to these primary elements. As it says there, look, Mum, no apps. Time is up from my side. I've certainly enjoyed putting the snapshot together. I've added in, for all the Excel fans, 10 AI tools to make your Excel work so much more pleasurable while you still rely on your Excel. And there are a whole lot of courses that are free from Google you might know about, breadth and from Microsoft too, that are at the back of that. So I thank you very much for this opportunity. As was mentioned, the first platform that I spoke on with CAW was called Future Fit Chartered Accountants. As you see on the screen, are technology savvy. That was July 2023. It was relevant then. It's so much more relevant now. And I'm looking forward to hearing your further questions and Miles and the other panelists talking away. So thank you so much, Ryan. There you go.
Thank you. Much appreciated. I think with all the information you've shared, we could maybe get you on for another, tips, tricks, use of tools. But that's a conversation for another day. So just to remind everyone who is in attendance, please share your questions you have. We have, put a list of questions together. We've formulated that with other questions from the panelists and so forth. So some more to come once we get into the details there. Our next panelist I'd like to introduce is Miles Corsett, a ICAW member who is the Global Strategy and Market Lead at EY here in New York. Fun fact, Miles also hosts EY's podcast surrounding finances and so forth. So, Miles, without further ado, over to you.
Well, thanks, Ryan. It's great to be here, and thanks for the introduction. I feel like there's a South African thread here, because having spent the first 15 years of my career in London, second 15 in New York. I was actually born in South Africa. So I do have a connection with you, Ryan and Errol. So I'd like to continue that story. You sort of gave my long job title, but fundamentally what I do with EY is help CFOs and finance leaders figure out how they transform their finance organizations. And so in a number of ways, putting together the full spectrum of services we do across EY to help solve those big challenges. And I think Nicola and Elle did such a great job of comprehensively going through so much. Maybe what I can add is just a little bit of perspective in terms of how clients, and particularly senior finance executives, are thinking about some of these challenges. And alongside the podcast, where I get to speak to a lot of CFOs, a lot of our alliance and technology partners and academics and thought leaders on where finance is going, I also have been, for the last 15 years, leading our DNA of the CFO program. So seeing how the role of the CFO has evolved. And again, I think evolution is the right word for it. I think a lot of people say, this is, massive change. It's like, well, no, actually, the fundamentals have very much remained the same. And, Errol, I love your reference to Tom Peters. And we had Tom Peters speak at an event. I think you look back over the 50 years of Tom's career, the message has been very consistent in terms of what matters, in terms of delivering excellence. And actually, that has happened through various technology cycles, but the core principles are the same. And so as I kind of look at that research, and I can also reference some research we did more recently on the DNA of the corporate controller, how that's evolving, and a piece that we're launching next week actually on DNA of the treasurer. But I think that the big trend is the shift towards value creation, right? And how, as finance people, do we move away from the traditional roles of protecting and optimizing for value into helping organizations create value? And that really, I think, has been a common thread for what executives have been trying to address for a long time. And we've talked about contribution to strategy. We've talked about business partnering, all these kind of things. And, coming back to the podcast, I spoke to Professor Noah Barsky from Villanova, and he talks about it very compellingly in the way that he has a lot of CFOs and senior finance leaders come through his graduate business program. And he asks them the question, where do you want to be focused? What's most important? And they'll trot off, it's about value creation, it's about business partnering. When he then asks them to talk about what are the things that they're working on, what are the things they're measuring, it's very much anchored in that value protection and value optimization. So there's this say-do gap between what as finance leaders we say is important and what we evidence. So I think one of the most exciting things about AI is how does it actually give us the opportunity to bridge that gap and really start to deliver on the value creation agenda. I think one of the big challenges, and I'm sure we'll get into this in terms of the ROI, is making the case for the investment in ROI. And I suspect many of you and many of the panelists will see the big challenge is continuing to manage the cost of finance, right? That is not going to go away, right? We need to be able to demonstrate fiscal responsibility and lead by example for our organizations. But that doesn't mean we shouldn't be making the case and articulating the case for why we need investment in AI and finance. And I think you look where a lot of the investment is going right now in organizations. Unsurprisingly, it is going into front office, customer-facing activities, customer acquisition, R&D, because that's what's driving the top line, and that's where, again, fundamentally value gets created. But that doesn't mean that if you free up capacity in finance, you can't be supporting that value creation agenda. So again, be able to demonstrate why actually, automating some of these routine processes, taking time and cost out of the finance function isn't just a cost reduction exercise. It's about how do you redeploy that capacity and that capability that you have in your finance function. So I think it's a really important point here around the communication, the narrative, and nobody is better positioned than finance, frankly, to be making that case, making that story. And again, I think you look at what are the sort of the characteristics of successful finance leaders, successful finance organizations. It's the ones that do get the human aspects right. It's the ones that are effective in communicating. And one of the key data points I use a lot in the presentations is a really compelling data point from some research we did with Oxford University. where 75% of CFOs that we surveyed have experienced some form of finance transformation failure in the last 5 years. And you think about the level of effort, the cost, the loss of motivation in employees that engenders. There's a real issue there. And the root cause is often that we don't get the aspects right. So being able to articulate the vision for finance, where you're going, to Errol's point, how does that tie into the enterprise strategy and keep people focused on that and really see technology as a tool as to how do you achieve those overall objectives. And again, I think too often, Errol made the great point, we see technology being used as an end in itself. And many finance organizations, have boards coming at them saying, what are you doing on AI? And so they jump to try and demonstrate some usage rather than actually saying, no, here's what we're trying to do as a finance organization. Here's how we're using AI as a technology and a tool towards that broader objective. So I'll pause there because there's a lot to get through. And I'm hoping to bring out some more experiences and some examples as we go through the questions, because some great questions come in already.
Great. Thank you, Miles. Our last panelist I'd love to introduce is Miss Nikita Clachen. Nikita is the CFO and Corporate Secretary of Mount Logan Capital. Nikita is a dear friend and who lives here in New York. I would like to congratulate Nikita as a big announcement last week with the listing of the company. Over to you, Nikita.
Oh, thank you, Ryan. Yes. So we're currently listed in Canada, but are actively transitioning to list in the US. So it's quite exciting. Before we begin, I just wanted to state that any views expressed here are purely my own and don't necessarily reflect the views of BC Partners or Mount Logan Capital or any of their affiliated entities. And so anything shared here is just for information or discussion purposes. But that being said, we and myself personally have been really laser focused on thinking about how we can implement AI as an organization and especially spearhead it from the finance function. We've sort of been looking at this as an organization sort of in 4 key areas. The first one being sort of a mindset shift for all of our accountants in terms of thinking about how they can stay relevant and sort of think about from a critical side and lens how they can do things. The next thing we've been looking at is sort of how we can use AI to disrupt processes. And so rather than going from data processing to sort of how we can be more strategic and analytical, especially looking at sort of the cost benefit from a CFO side, the question is that I always get is, do we need to hire one more person or can we use technology to do this job for us? And sometimes it's a bit of both, but sort of trying to demonstrate intentional hiring with using AI at the same time and not using AI to replace jobs, as everyone hates that saying doesn't get much traction. As a company, although I manage more of the core function side of our business, the front side of Mount Logan Capital and BC Partners, where we work, or where I work as BC is the advisor to Mount Logan, we really are looking at sort of portfolio management and optimization and what ways we can start using predictive analytics and AI to help our business. I recently was at a panel where we were talking about what is AI, and oftentimes AI just becomes a buzzword for using technology in a different way. So in some ways, it's not really AI that we're using. It's really more predictive analytics or some more sort of data language or algorithm that we've been using instead. But the sentiment still gets you there. But sometimes the regulatory exposure is a little less if it's not actually AI, it's analytics instead. So trying to think about that from a portfolio management side, how we can use it there, how we can look at private credit deal sourcing, which is where most of our investments are made, and how we can do that in something that otherwise is a very sort of high touch model. And so that sort of dovetails nicely into the last piece, which is related to internal efficiency and sort of deal sourcing on the front side. So how can finance partner with our front office to make sure that we're sort of thinking about sourcing deals quickly and efficiently and using AI versus sort of our old Excel systems that everyone defaults to on the back end. So yeah, looking forward to the discussion today.
Thank you, Nikita. And with that, could we launch our second polling question? And if our polling question is up, it will state, will a proficiency in AI and data analytics become a requirement for new hires? Yes or no? And once we get the results, we can share that. As that is circulating and as we wait for everyone to comment, I think it's time for us to move into our discussion. As mentioned, when we put the list of panelists together, we curated our questions from the audience. They sent in questions, things that they'd like to have answers for. My cheat sheet with this, my first thought was to use AI to help me circulate, get everything together, and really bring out the most important points and concepts to share. So I was at a conference recently listening to Jeff Woods, an AI-driven leader, and he kind of shared the CRIT concept. So using that framework, I'll kind of curate and put these questions together. So without further ado, I'd like to get into the discussion. So is everyone ready? Great.
Right.
Thank you. So first question. What mindset shift is most critical for accountants to stay relevant as AI reshapes the profession? And this is maybe one for each of you to answer. So starting on the left-hand side of my screen, Miles.
Well, thanks, Ron. Yeah, and it's a great question. I think this point about mindset and culture is absolutely central to the discussion. And I think I'd answer it in a couple of ways. I think Errol mentioned curiosity. I think curiosity is such an important attribute, and the speed with which things are moving mean if we don't sort of engender curiosity in ourselves and our organizations, we're going to get left behind very quickly. The other thing I think is kind of the fixed mindset versus growth mindset. I think again too often we can see this as a zero-sum game rather than seeing it as the opportunities that it presents. And actually, as finance people, the opportunity to be more customer facing, to be engaged in the commercial decisions is something I think many of us have aspired to for a long time, and that opportunity is now being presented to us. And then I think again, just on the downside, too often as finance people, we can rely on our expertise and being seen as experts. And I think, again, going back to this kind of open-mindedness, we need to recognize that we won't always have the answers and be willing to experiment and innovate. And so how do we sort of engender the innovation mindset in our organizations is also going to be key. And I can maybe talk about some examples later on about how to think about that.
Thank you. Errol?
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. I'm fairly staggered still, the number of accountants in smaller firms in the UK who think they can stay where they are. Now, perhaps I think it was Miles who mentioned something about the digital natives and the other folk. And the other folk, maybe they've given rise to the tremendous sale in small and medium-sized practices that we've seen that's taken place and the consolidation through ownership of them. But the change of mindset is something that's very difficult to see it happening. But a big driver here in the UK, perhaps a little bit in contrast, maybe, I don't mean to speak out of turn to Ireland, I don't know. But in the UK, Making Tax Digital and various other initiatives are driving everyone involved in the process to become at least more digital, if not AI-driven. But the automation side of it just seems it's almost being forced. So I think that there are multiple factors that will help the industry be jogged along. And of course, my favorite drum that I beat The competition. Otherwise, you ain't going to make it.
Thanks, Errol. Nicola.
Sure. Thanks, Ryan. So for me, I think and I mentioned this earlier, we have to really move from being that tax executor to that strategic advisor. And I think that's whether you're practicing public accounting or if you're in an industry. We've seen the CFO role change over the years from being just preparing financial statements to then, being part of the FP&A function, being the HR person, sometimes the legal function. So really trying to have multiple hats. And I think we'll continue to see this as we go on this journey. I also think that we need to cultivate more of a questioning mindset. We're going to have to understand how the AI is giving you these answers, right? How is it deriving that solution and challenging assumptions? What are the data sources that it's using? And really having to think a little bit more about whether we can trust it versus if it was a human, whether or not, it's any different, we will have to have that a little bit more. So those are a couple of things I think would need to start to grow.
Thank you. And Nikita?
Yeah, I think as going last, I can just say everyone has said everything I already would have said. But no, I think the biggest thing I'm seeing with AI now from an accounting lens is that we have to shift from what we have said we've always been responsible for and taking on more, because there's just this perception that things can get done faster with AI. And so it's finding ways to actually get that to be a reality. For example, we use AI now to draft most of our accounting memos, at least the first pass. And so, especially depending on where you are in your career, for me, it's almost out of necessity to use AI just because there's not enough hours in the day to do things. But for depending on stage of career, it's thinking about how you can use AI to differentiate yourself from your peers as well, and thinking about harnessing it to find efficiencies in your own work, similar to what we've been using technology for all along. So we view, for example, Copilot or some of the other deep research AI tools, we view them almost like a second-year analyst. And so the work that we give them or we use the tool for instead then allows our employees to do sort of more value add items. So being familiar with all of the tools that some have been even shared here earlier is really helpful.
Ryan, could I just add one last?
Of course. Go ahead, Errol.
What comes to mind, Chris was talking about the airline industry. If you were a pilot, you started on a single prop tiny plane. You work your way up to jets, the turboprops, and you get onto the heavy, the 747s and whatever, the big planes. You can then sit back at some stage in the flight and flick onto autopilot. If something goes wrong, you've got a very, very good idea of the fundamental basic principles. And perhaps that's the kind of flip side of the mindset that if we expect folk who are not naturally comfortable in a digital world to switch into this AI mode, it's unsurprising that they may feel a bit intimidated or question it and be cynical. And more scary is there may be things that are happening and they won't even know about it till it's too late. So that model maybe helps us to unpack the progression of the adoption in the mind, changing of the mindset.
And to leverage what Miles said in terms of the mindset shift, right, from this, conventional success where you're okay with everything that's happening right now to this transformative mindset where change is going to occur, change is going to happen. So would you agree with that? Would you say that for our folks who are thinking in that capacity, they are better equipped, or at least are on the journey to success? I see lots of heads nodding, so I'll take that as a yes. Next question. How do we see AI changing the relationship between accountants and their clients or vendors? And Miles, I'm going to start with you and then pass it over to Nikita.
Yeah, I feel I'm being picked on getting first every time, but
It's the Miles. It's because I found out you were born in South Africa, so that kind of my natural inkling is.
that doesn't mean I'm not short of an opinion, so I'll take it. But look, it's a great question, Ryan, and I think there's one that probably everybody on this panel and on the webcast today is probably wrestling with, right? And I think to me the really big question is, how do you demonstrate value in this environment? Whatever your role, are you able to clearly articulate the value that you're bringing? And that is clearly going to change in an AI driven world, right? And I think Nikita referenced it, right? If you're producing a technical accounting memo, if the first draft can be done with AI, there is still value to be delivered, but that's through actually then bringing all of the experience, the understanding of history, the judgmental areas. So there is still huge value to be delivered, but you have to be really clear on what it is, and you have to be laser focused on spending your time doing that. And that I think is again where a lot of the shift is going to come. And that's at a personal level, at an organizational level, right? Again, I think for many of the the firms, ourselves included, it's right. How are we articulating that value proposition? What does it mean in terms of how we charge and capture for value from clients? And that is, I think, going to change very significantly. We've all grown up with a world of time and materials and charging for hours or minutes of our people. That model is going to change very significantly, and it's going to require a very significant shift in how we think, how we operate, how we organize our businesses. And clients are going to expect it, because they're going to be saying, look, a lot of these things that you've previously done with junior people, I expect technology to be doing, but that doesn't mean the technology is free. And I think there's always a risk that, again, we give away too much of the value through that we've embedded in technology. So at the moment, I think there's a lot of conversations going about how do you charge for that we're going to evolve very quickly over the next year or so.
Right. Nikita, as a client, what's your...
Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, we could definitely go back and forth on this one. I think it's definitely pressure on cost, I think, for vendors now, as we're getting quotes for things. It's like, well, are you going to be using AI? And if you are, then we expect somewhat of a discount, because we realize that the time and materials doesn't really make the same sense as it once did. So there's definitely pressure there. The second piece, I would say, with vendor management is sort of the risk in terms of data and where's it going. So we've been pretty strict, even in terms of using Chat GPT as an organization, and our licenses to some of the deep research tools. We've been trying not to use them as much, or they're restricted in terms of who can access them, because there is the concern that this information then goes out sort of into the ether, and then who else is querying on the other side and may get access to, say, an investment analysis memorandum of sort. So there's that sort of the data secret or privacy rules are sort of also at play, especially owning an insurance company. There's always the risk with HIPAA and PII that something may slip in some way. So there's probably more controls that we're putting in place over use of AI by vendors. I'd say we similarly, although we mainly work B2B, are seeing similar AI pressure with sort of our investors, and saying, how are you utilizing AI? What is your AI strategy? How are we going to see this translate into your financial results? And so it's coming up with a good strategy around that and being proactive to make sure that we're not just, we as an organization aren't falling behind either.
Thank you, Nikita. So with that, I do want to get back to a third polling question, just to keep us on track and ensure that everyone's getting their CPE credits. I know many of you are here for the AI learnings and getting to know us and hearing from our panelists, but I'm sure some of you are here for the credits. So without further ado, next polling question. If there is a financial impact or error caused by AI, who is responsible? And you'll see the list of options there. Is it the accountants using the system and their firm? The AI developer? Both or neither? And David, if you could chime in and just let me know. I think it is quite evident.
Yeah, Ryan, the leading one at the moment is the accountant using the system and their firm is got 2/3 of the votes.
Thank you. We'll keep that open and see how that evolves. But moving on to our next question, and in the essence of time, and we've got a plethora of questions to get to, I do want to ensure we hear from all the panelists. So I'm going to mix it up slightly. The next question is, what are the biggest challenges firms face when integrating AI into legacy systems, and how are you going to overcome them? I'll start with Nicola.
Thanks, Ryan. Can I just actually touch real quick on the last question that you asked? Really in part that Nikita brought up about the cost and the way that we price accounting, right? We've always had it, and I think it leads in a little bit to your first question about the mindset. I think we need to shift that mindset that our time is valuable and start to think about what is it that we're delivering and what advice and value are we bringing and costing it that way, because the technology is not free. But we are kind of, just as a firm, I want to mention that we're moving away from this billable hours and more so like, hey, what are we bringing to you? What would you pay for this? And how do we have that partnership? So it's interesting because I think it's that's a really big cultural shift in our industry.
And Nicola, would that be more of a return on investment, right? So if there's X amount of savings, we would take a percentage of that. How does that look?
I think it could look different depending on the different project, but yes, absolutely. I think that'd be a great example, Ryan, of what are you going to get from this? Okay, like we'll take that, or how many people are you not needing now in your finance function because you're outsourcing everything to us, and we are leveraging technology, but we're doing a whole lot more in delivering financials and cash flows. So it's an evolving model, but it's an interesting point that Akita raised. But going back to your initial question about, the biggest challenges when integrating into legacy systems, I mean, I touched on this before, but you have fragmented systems and fragmented data. If you have multiple different tools, and, we still have people who work on desktop applications, right? I think QuickBooks desktop is still a thing. It's really difficult to start to integrate AI into that because you can't even get that information onto the cloud and into a useful way. So that is a huge investment that I think accounting firms, not necessarily accounting firms, most accounting firms might be on QBD. Smaller businesses might be focusing in how do we map that and get it into consistent data so that the system can ingest it and be able to utilize it, especially if you have, a different inventory system to your ERP, to your workforce management, all of those different systems that you use. If they're not speaking to each other, you're not going to get consistency, and rubbish in, rubbish out, as we like to say. Another thing, and I heard this a couple of times as well, is that cybersecurity. So a lot of the legacy systems might not be able to keep up with the threats of cyber attacks that can come with AI. With AI, you're getting much more advanced cyber attacks. As I mentioned, I know somebody that was hit with one this morning by clicking on a link in an email. And so how do you maintain the privacy and the governance around that and your security and utilize that data in a good way? I also think that when you're integrating AI into legacy systems, you have this talent piece to it. And again, going back to that mindset shift and upskilling, a lot of people are not willing to learn new systems, or they do fear the job displacement, so they resist integrating AI into their systems. And so they have to go through that process with them, give them guidance in a way that they can ingest it, And that may look different depending if you're a junior individual, a mid-level individual, or a senior individual. So you're always kind of wanting to be very mindful of that. And then another one I'll just touch on is we can rush into things a little bit too much as people, right? There's so many different tools that you can utilize, and it's easy to kind of see the shiny object and say, hey, I'm gonna go with that tool because I think it's the right one for my business. But actually, maybe you haven't done the thorough due diligence. Maybe it is not the right tool and there's a better one out there for you. And if you go down a path, it can be much more complex to unwind that and much more costly to unwind it than it would be to do it the right way. So I'd say you really need to be very mindful and do that thorough due diligence and think about your strategic objectives before you go on your AI path.
And so thinking back to a point that I think Errol or Miles raised regarding, or it might have been in the previous session, but failed ERPs or executives saying that 75% of finance transformations they've not been happy with it, right? So does that mindset shift really need to start at that executive level? And I'll let Miles, Errol, and Nikita maybe follow on to the question and then their thoughts on my comment.
Sure, Ryan. So I'd like to comment on Nicola's first part, which was the non-answer, then on a real answer, and then on the prior. There's so many wonderful things coming at you. And Nicola, thank you. I don't have to say very much about the data side. You've said it really so articulately. I think the biggest challenge is data, of all the many challenges. And I say that because it's fairly apparent in virtually all the firms that we read about and that we interface with. They're really not sure where their data is when you go below the surface, whether it's on spreadsheets or internally or externally or who knows where. It's not secure. It is secure. Who's got access? Who doesn't? There are a myriad of questions for the data. So I'll leave it because of what Nicola said there. On the challenge of pricing and customers' expectation, maybe accounting firms and vendors have allowed themselves to have the perception to be created that they on a cost plus basis. And now that cost is shifting downwards, so the selling price should go down. It's a good time to think about a premium pricing strategy. And a premium pricing, you may lose some clients, but you're going to get it back, usually correctly done many times. Wasn't me, but Michael Porter of Harvard, who said there are only two pricing strategies, premium or lowest cost. So pick your choice and your bottom line responds. The last point, though, is we in this group in particular, the number of all the delegates and us, are very good at defining numbers. And we want to know the cost and we want to know the benefits. Got to be numerate and to the last 2 decimal points. By going away from our industry, in one of our cases, we've been working with clinical psychologists. Now, AI and clinical psychology, we're fortunate to be started Bournemouth University in 2010 with online psychology. And you think, what am I babbling on about? What relevance has that got to us? Well, general principle, move out your company or country, look at it from another place, and you learn a lot. The psychologists have said, yeah, it's great. Now they don't have to take notes and, work late to do the clinical notes that HIPAA and other requirements or their profession require them to do. They've got HIPAA concerns about data security. So tick that little box, great. They can look at the notes that have been made for them. That's not the real benefit. The real benefit is, first of all, they now don't have to stay up late at night and over the weekend, so they're more relaxed generally. But the real benefit, which is quantifiable eventually, is that in engagement with their clients in psychology sessions, they are wholly engaged on the client. And that's what they paid to do. That's their real. So the answers are not necessarily so apparent. And it behooves everyone to really drill deep into these questions of benefit of AI, because I think we'll still learn a lot about it as we go down the track.
Thank you, Errol. Any other comments from the rest of the panelists?
Yeah, I mean, maybe just, I'm very happy that Errol and I clearly share a reading list. So the other thing I think, Michael Porter would say very clearly is from a strategic perspective, you don't have to capture the whole market. So just be very clear the part of the market you're trying to capture and again, make sure you're going off that effectively. But look, I think we could spend all day talking about data. I think everyone understands the importance of high quality data. I think, one of the opportunities for finance people is to provide context around the data. And I think a lot of what we're seeing, with some of the challenges of AI application, is that people assume you can point AI at vast unstructured data sets and expect, amazing results. I think there's a real role for finance to provide context around the data, be much more targeted in how you use AI to deliver insight, which I think you shouldn't get lost. And then the other piece I would just say is a lot of this comes down to culture, right? And changing the culture to adapt to where you need to be as an organization. And again, that sort of flow from understanding the vision of the organization, the vision of the finance function. What does that then mean in terms of the culture you need to have? And what are the behaviors that as a leader, you're role modeling, you're showing matter to you? And again, we've talked about it. It's about the ability to innovate, the ability to change, to think differently in this world, because we've got a whole different set of tools that we can now use to do our jobs in a very different way.
Thank you, Miles.
And I'd say, Miles, just on that point, I agree. I think it's that ultimately, as an officer of a company, I set a lot of the strategy or the intention and the spirit of using AI, but a lot of what we're seeing on the accounting side in terms of innovation is sort of like we provide the tool, but then my team is the one that's really many times actioning a solution, saying, hey, I'm spending 10 hours of my week on this. I think we could use a tool and use it faster. And so it's sort of, I think, as with all things with technology, it's like a younger generation embraces it, and then I sort of have begrudgingly adopted it. It's sort of, we're both kind of meeting in the middle with this one, and so both sides hopefully are adding value there.
Great. Thank you, Nikita. So I think that's a good segue into, I'd say, the next topic surrounding AI and accountants, which really is skills and workforce. And I'll start with Nicola and Nikita here. What skill should mid-career accountants drop? And what mindsets or capability should they adapt instead? And I think we've discussed a little bit of mindset, so this is probably an easy one for the two of you.
I think from my perspective, we really need to get rid of this rigid thinking and be a lot more open to, again, the change, the flexibility. We're very rules-based as accountants. That's a generic statement, but we are, right? We've learned how to follow a regulation and do the compliance work. And we just need to kind of get away from that. We don't need to memorize standards anymore. We don't need to be technically perfect. We can really be that advisor. And so using more judgment, collaborating, and again, using the AI as a collaborator, not as a competitor, and then truly thinking about best interest of the client, and more client-centric thinking. I think that those would be the most beneficial to mid-career accountants.
I agree. I think there's no pride in sort of who's working harder anymore. It's sort of who's working more efficiently. And in many ways, AI is that tool that can help with working more efficiently, especially at the mid-level. I think it's it's a really good spot because we all have this understanding of the technical and how something is supposed to be. So then if AI gives you an answer that's hallucinating, then you can kind of sense check it and go, oh, this doesn't seem right. Whereas I see that with new hires we get right out of college, they'll just ask AI, oh, how do I account for this? And then whatever AI says is what they do. And that's like the worst case outcome that you can land on, because then the individual is not really learning in their career, and they're also, they don't have that critical judgment as to, is this right or wrong? So for the mid-level, I think it's just figuring out how to use it as a tool, as well as just thinking about from a strategic sense of, rather than how do I automate what I'm doing now, to being more strategic in terms of what is the organization trying to accomplish and how can I use AI to help accomplish that goal or achieve that desired outcome.
Great. And then for both Nicola and Nikita, do you have a favorite tool that you like to use or your teams are using?
Ours is Copilot. We're a big Microsoft shop here. We have agents through Microsoft, so I use Copilot for everything. My biggest fear, honestly, is that I'm becoming lazy, right? And I think that that's something that mid-level people need to try and actively work against, because it's so easy to not have to use your brain as much when you have these tools. But sorry, Nikita, what was
Yeah, no, I agree. I think Copilot is easy because it's integrated into everything. It's really useful. I use Copilot now to help me summarize all my emails every day. Like, for example, during this webcast, I know I'm going to come back to an inbox that's overflowing. And so I could mentally scan through quickly all of it and see, but I can also just say, like, summarize the key items in my inbox that I've missed in the last hour, and it'll direct me to it. Is it foolproof? No, but likely if something's on fire, it's going to catch it right away. So Copilot makes it pretty easy. We also have a few paid licenses to ChatGPT Deep Research. And that one I find is really useful if we wanted to do something that isn't just strict pulling an answer like from a guide or saying, hey, how do I account for this? But more so it's not sentient in any way, but if we want a little bit more of a perspective on something, it'll pull more from sort of different sources on the internet. So we'll say, oh, use Bloomberg to get this, use Intelligize, and it'll come up with sort of a view. So, for example, with becoming a NASDAQ registrant, we asked AI to pull together a benchmarking exercise for us on board compensation and based on this subset of peers. And then we asked for it to include recommendations. And so then it pulled in information from Glass Lewis and different proxy agencies. And so it did all of this in a couple hours, whereas, yes, a person could have done that, but it would have taken a couple days potentially, or even we would have maybe had to have paid sort of a third-party provider to help us structure board comp. And so for a small cap company, if we can use technology to give us a little bit of an edge, that anything there helps. So yeah, I'd say that one piece.
Errol, you look like you would like to add.
Yeah, thanks, Ryan. Two quick ones. Personally, I didn't like it at all at Grok. That product, fantastic. My go-to for technical questions in any sphere of our business or personal life. Claude is fantastic in writing emails or messages and what have you. But the thing that I really wanted to say was so wonderful, we don't have to worry about, can't use the commercial brand name, is we are currently signing up for a product which the chief executive and chief marketing officer of DocuSign spoke about 4 or 5 months ago. We all know DocuSign, but DocuSign is now available in the States and then rolling out on steroids. All of the documents that have gone through DocuSign for your company, all of your other contracts, your policies, your principles, your terms and conditions, feed it all into your DocuSign basket. And then you say, right, well, I've got a template for an NDA. It's easy enough to do. But today I'm doing a joint venture. There's no president. Tomorrow I'm doing a different kind of a contract. It spits out the first draft on target. And we're just uber excited about it. Only just starting to play with it, but it looks like it is going to do, amongst other things, it knows all of your contracts. So it'll say, hey, in 3 months' time, do you know your biggest client is due to renew? Have you started chasing them or whatever? Really, really highly recommend you at least have a look at DocuSign's AI offerings. Sorry.
Mark?
I mean, Ryan, I'll just say EYQ, our in-house OMM, is clearly my favorite. We've invested over $1 billion in it, so I would be remiss not to say I don't use that every day, which I certainly do. But I think, again, for the audience that don't have that kind of investment capacity, I think one of the interesting things, and I don't know if everyone picked it up, but I know ChatGPT-5 got a bit of a sort of muted reception when it launched, but actually at the same time, one of the more interesting things that, say from my perspective, I think got picked up by the developer community, but perhaps not as widely publicized, was ChatGPT OS, which actually will allow organizations and enterprises to apply ChatGPT to data within their own firewalls information. So again, getting access to the large language models and capabilities of ChatGPT without some of the concerns around data security, I think many people are obviously worried about.
Great, thank you. I think that's a good segue into how are each of you, and this question maybe back at Nikita, and then Miles, you can follow in. How do we train our teams to critically evaluate AI-generated outputs, especially when they look polished but might be flawed? Nikita.
I mean, I guess the student in me always likes to have a little bit of a friendly competition in terms of can someone effectively challenge AI and get a correct answer out of it. So we've definitely set up in terms of within the accounting team, sort of if someone is using AI, that we have sort of a similar to having like a doer and a reviewer, you have like a reviewer who's really questioning the output and saying like, okay, it does look like AI wrote this, but as I'm critically assessing this, how does this pass muster? So I think that's the first thing. The other thing that I do, especially when I'm reviewing output from teams, is like the extent of questions I ask them will generally get me a good sense of whether or not they actually understood what they were doing, or if they just asked ChatGPT to do it for them. And if it seems like it's that, then we know it gets redone or done with a twist so that we can get a better or a more understandable output. Also, just, I mean, speaking with peers and participating in items like in forums such as this, it gives a good sense of like, okay, what are other organizations doing that we can try and adopt as well. So we work with our auditors a lot just in terms of, okay, hey, we're thinking about using AI for this process. Like, what kind of questions are you going to ask as part of your audit so that we make sure we have sort of everything documented, so it's not just a black box of Copilot told us this, so we did this. So that is actually where the deep research is pretty useful, because it will cite all the sources, so it makes it a little bit easier to fact check, which Copilot sometimes does, but sometimes doesn't. But generally speaking, just having healthy skepticism, and usually if it's too good to be true, it is too good to be true, unfortunately, even if the computer knows best. We're just trying to just keep that healthy skepticism, like when you're a new auditor out of college. So pass it on to the group.
Yeah, I think it's so well said, Nikita. And I think as chartered accountants and accountants, that sort of professional training around professional skepticism is such an important skill that we have to maintain, nurture, and because it becomes, I think, even more important in an AI-driven world. I think, to me, the other challenge around this now, and I say this as someone started my career 30 years ago. I used to audit consumer products companies. I was able to see the journey from how accounting was done at the factory floor all the way through how it got presented to analysts, and so that understanding of how finance flowed, how numbers flowed to the organization. Yeah, I think for a lot of junior people coming into the organizations now, how do they have that baseline understanding, that baseline knowledge? How, as firms, universities, do we establish that is going to be really important, because again, to be able to be skeptical, you've got to understand what good looks like. You've got to have that baseline of understanding against which to evaluate and assess.
Well said, Miles. Anyone else? Would you like to comment?
You've said so much, but just a quick one is that, especially on the many fields in which I know less than nothing, which often happens in the semiconductor world, and I'm asked an opinion or however I have to do it, it will always run the first AI's response through at least 3 other unrelated AI engines. And they compete pretty well. They've all got strengths and weaknesses, just like people. And that's a tactic that I can recommend.
No, thank you. So time for our 4th polling question. In the missing word, AI can't replicate intelligence. So Please add in the missing word that you think is most relevant: creative, emotional, or logical. I'd like to think we all know the answer for this one. And if not, it's a learning process for all. Errol, what's your thoughts on that polling question?
I'm struggling to read it, but I would say that AI now or soon is very close to having at least quasi-intelligence, the first concept that comes to mind. The more interesting question, going back to our psychology folks, that gets debated hard and long is, has or will AI have consciousness? And that's a very interesting and lengthy debate. The answer to that, in my opinion, is no. And it can mimic emotions quite accurately. We were doing that 6 years ago with chatbots in giant banks in India before COVID. And you can respond emotionally, you can respond intelligently, but consciousness is another thing.
Not very good. So the correct answer there, as I was told, is emotional, right? That emotional intelligence. And I think a lot of that has come through in our discussion, IQ versus EQ, when we're getting that and consuming that information, right? That professional skepticism to really evaluate what you're looking at, right? Yes, AI is going to get us 80% of the way there, but we want to make sure that it actually makes sense. Using that, the emotional intelligence side, that critical thinking, the things you can't tangibly feel, right? Those intangibles, so to speak. Moving on to our final section, which is ethics, security, and governance. So I have a couple of questions to kind of finish out our panel here. Nicola, Errol, I'll start with the two of you. What ethical concerns should accountants be aware of when using AI, specifically regarding bias and fairness?
Bias and?
Fairness.
Fairness.
And I'll start with Nicola.
I think, it's at the end of the day, everything in the AI is an algorithm. So there's a lot of algorithm bias. You could tell the AI, the input to the data could be the sky is pink, and it's going to spit out the sky is pink. So it's really about thinking, what is the data that's going into it as well? And do you trust the data? I think that's where the human piece really becomes important to have that ethical consideration. But just going back to the skills that those mid-level people are going to need, that judgment calls, the questioning mindset, super important. And yeah, Errol.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Nicola. It is super important, but I think one does need to look at the application context. Not for a second suggesting you want anything which is biased or unethical or anything like that. But it's more important or less important depending on the context. So if one is in lending and the unfair lending practices to a particular group or for a particular area because of the data, that's clearly not fair, and you need to go into that with your eyes wide open, and that might not be what a company or a lender would want to do. On the other hand, there are areas, and I'm trying to think of one where ethics in the numbers, there's more functional stuff. I hope this is a great example. You will tell me if it was or wasn't. I've been associated with a company which has been doing everything we spoke, machine learning, all the models for over a decade. 6 years ago, $100,000 was put into a stockbroker's account in the United States, and the machine was set to do not more than 30, I think it was, transactions every quarter, buying or selling stocks on the New York Stock Exchange, large cap top 100. That was its mandate. The market has gone up by, I think it was 109%, audited figures for the first 5 years. That's to last June. And this $100,000 is now $439,000. It's gone up more than double. You can work out the figures. So I don't know if there are ethical considerations in a functional task like that. The stuff is working. And that's, to me, the answer to the question. So I do think one needs to be cautious. The UK have taken, I think, a very balanced approach by the regulators. They're very collaborative with the industry, first with fintech and now with AI. They're very open. They've got a test facility where you can run your models and develop them and see how they go, whether they cross any red lines. And they've had a light touch. Because my final comment on this, I think if one gets too hyped up about any aspect of AI and wants to take dramatic internal or external regulatory action, one potentially can throw the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak. This is a very immature side of technology, although it has been going a long time, but it's going so fast. We've got a long way to go, and we need to harness the benefits in a common sense way.
Thank you, Errol. Miles, any additional comments, Dave?
Well, I think it's well covered.
Great. So with us coming close on time, last question for the group before final thoughts. What formidable barriers are holding back AI's return on investment in your finance function? Start with Nikita.
I'd say right now the biggest piece is that we have a lot of data that could be utilized to sort of help us with some predictive analytics or sort of coming up with insights that we may not already have, but it's not very uniform. And so while we have all of these tools embedded so that when I open my email, Copilot shows up right away and says, do you want me to help you draft this message? We don't necessarily have that same thing in terms of when our team looks at data and it wants to do a predictive analytic. It's not going to be able to do it that well because the data that it's looking at isn't that clean. And so I'd say that's probably the biggest challenge we're having right now is in terms of just cleaning up this backlog of historical information and making it uniform so that we can sort of do more with it.
Miles and Nicola, are you both seeing that at your clients?
Absolutely.
Yeah, and I would just add, I think Nikita articulated it well. I think the part of the challenge is AI is one of a number of things on a list of to-dos, right? And so you're sort of competing for airspace, you're competing for investment dollars, and I think, Ian, one of the big challenges, Ryan, I see is being able to articulate what the value proposition is, particularly in terms of the return. This is a new and evolving technology where, frankly, we don't know what the upsides are. And as accountants, we're very good at measuring the cost side of the equation. We're less good. So it's how do you bring more of that sort of probabilistic versus deterministic mindset. And again, we've got to run some scenarios. We've got to be able to sort of make small bets, see how they pay back, understanding that, again, the traditional ways of thinking about this aren't necessarily fit for purpose. And I did a roundtable in New York last year where we were talking about it with some financial services CFOs. And there was I think, challenge here is, it's the fear versus greed sale. And they made the case that in financial services, particularly going back to Nicola's example about cybersecurity, if I'm asked to spend $1 in cyber versus $1 in AI, I'm going to spend it in cyber because I don't want to be the one that's left holding the baby if something goes wrong from a cyber perspective. So again, this sort of competing for investment dollars and how you make sure you're getting funding because there is significant upside here. I think we would all agree the potential there is there. It's just how do we get there sooner rather than later.
No, thank you. Thank you very much. So final question for the group before we close, maybe a quick 30 seconds from each of you. The main message you would like to share with the audience, 30 seconds, starting with Nikita.
Dear. Because I said I liked going last before, wasn't it? I would say that back in college, I had an administrative policy professor who said innovate or die, which is something that I've tried to live my career by. And so I think AI is just one more tool that we can all use in our careers to move forward to innovate and make accounting the exciting profession that attracted us to it in the first place. Pass it on to Miles or Nicola. Yeah.
I love that. I mean, I truly believe, and I know that this is a chartered accountants and not a CPA, but we are the coolest profession around, the CPA. I think that AI is going to help attract that younger generation, and I think we all just need to get on board with it. You know, we went from the abacus to the sheet. We went from the sheet to the calculator. We went from the calculator to Excel. We're now going into the AI world. You know, all of these things have made our job so much more interesting, and it's just transformed it. So I think don't fight it. See it again as a collaborator, and you know, let's just keep this profession alive and fun.
Great, Errol.
I agree with Nikita and Nicola. I'd say to everyone, embrace automation and AI as a new fundamental discipline. It's as fundamental to what we do as accounting, tax, auditing, and all the rest. It's absolutely right up there. Think of it as a challenge if it as a new language that you're learning to speak, but absolutely get involved. It's your new best friend forever. Using Nicola's analogy and just going a bit further, somebody invented the wheel, electricity and its benefits were discovered. The next thing is AI. It's here. It's like the air we breathe. So I think it's that transformative. And with two kind of trite one-liners, the past certainly is not a good predictor of the future, and the future ain't what it used to be. So let's enjoy it.
That's great. Thank you, Errol. Miles, in closing.
I'll just end with a Bill Gates quote, which I think is very applicable, which is, in the short term, we tend to overestimate. In the long term, we underestimate the power of technology. And I think we're at that point in the hype cycle now where we're realizing AI is a bit more difficult than we originally thought. And, but actually, I think that undersells the actual transformative potential that we have. So I think the real question for all of us is how do we kind of experiment? How do we learn what the power is? And at the moment, I think we're applying AI to traditional mental models, traditional organizational structures, and the real breakthroughs and the transformation will come as we think about what an AI native organization looks like and the true transformative power. So I'm certainly excited to see where that goes.
Great. Thank you to each of you for joining. Appreciate the time in joining us, preparing for this conversation, taking the time out of your busy schedules to be here with all of our members. I'm sure everyone appreciated it. I'm sure you're going to get a lot of follow-up questions from our chartered accountants and extended folks who joined today. But without further ado, I'm going to hand it back over to David. He's got one last final polling question to get through and close. Thank you.
Thank you, Ryan. And let's launch that final poll. We're at time, so please bear with us for another minute or two. The fifth poll is, does the development of advanced AI challenge our understanding of what it means to be human? Yes, no, or not yet. While you're responding, I'd like to thank our presenters and you, our attendees. Before you exit, please fill in the feedback survey, which will be available on screen. And as stated at the outset, we will be following up within 2 or 3 weeks with digital badges for all attendees and CPE certificates for members who are also US CPAs and have qualified by answering our polls. In addition, if you have a question that hasn't been answered today, ask it again in the survey comments and we will have one of our presenters get back to you. We would also like to highlight our next webinar, our biannual IFRS update from BDO on September the 23rd at noon Eastern. And now let's share the result of the poll. And the result of the poll, can't see the result, is 40% yes, 35% not yet, 25% no. So thank you. And again, goodbye.